Welcome to the ER Break Room, the University of Florida Department of Emergency Medicine's podcast. In here, we get to know each other, celebrate our achievements, and highlight our initiatives. I'm your host, Michael Petrauskas. In this episode, I'm excited to talk with Dr. Mary Patterson and Dr. Meredith Thompson, two incredible leaders, educators, researchers, and clinicians. But first off, let's start with highs of the month. Over the course of the past week or two, brand new third-year medical students started their rotations, bringing their enthusiasm and desire to learn to the clinical setting. Their presence is a refreshing reminder of where us physicians started out and why we chose to pursue medicine. Next up, we have Dr. Tricia Swan, who was named a rock star volunteer by ACEP. Dr. Carolyn Holland was elected to be a UF Faculty Senate representative. And Dr. Brandon Allen gave her grand rounds at St. Louis University Emergency Medicine Residency titled Emergency Medicine and High Sensitivity Troponin, An Evolution to Optimal Care. It was very well received. And I suppose for the first time, we need to do a low of the month. Dr. Tricia Swan is leaving the University of Florida Emergency Medicine for a new opportunity. She is an incredible leader, educator, researcher, and clinician as well, and someone who has helped me personally in my first year at UF, working in the Pediatrics Emergency Department. Tricia, you will be dearly missed. I'd like to welcome Dr. Meredith Thompson to our podcast today. Meredith is our clerkship director and the director of undergraduate medical education for our department. So, Meredith, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Happy to have you on. So, as I told you before, I was doing a lit review or lit search for something I was working on, and I came across an article that I thought was interesting. And I see that you were one of the authors on the article, and it was just published several months ago. So I thought, wow, first of all, what a great article and what a great opportunity to bring you on to talk about the article. And the study.
Sure. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. So first of all, I saw that you had a collaboration with other authors from other institutions. How did your group come together?
Sure. So this project was a part of what's called the MERC program. So it's Medical Education Research Certificate Program. So it's run through the AAMC, where they do like workshops, and then to get the certificate, you have to like finish a project. So this project kind of came out of that certificate program. And so, so they do the workshops at the National EM conferences. A representative from the AAMC comes and gives the workshops. And then you have like EM specific mentors in the research areas. So, yeah.
Very cool. And so, and it's in the topic that you guys chose to address was in the field of wellness, I saw, which is near and dear to my heart as well. How did you decide on the topic? Was the whole group also invested in wellness in their institutions, or?
Right. I think so. The people I worked with were all in residency education, either program directors or core faculty or those types of things. And they were a little bit further along than I was at the time, because we started the project in 2017. Wow. So they were a little bit further along, I would say like mid-career. And I think they were burnt out and they wanted to look at the issue kind of for selfish reasons. And I was like, okay, sounds good.
That's great. Yes. That's great.
So,
I thought this study was awesome. I think it was super, everything was cool. It was unique. It was elegant. I mean, talk about it. What did you guys do?
Yeah. So, our goal was to do a national survey of emergency medicine residency faculty. So really just focusing on those EM faculty that are at academic institutions and kind of understand what their workload was like, because based on kind of, my group participants' experience, they felt they were working way more than kind of what was in their contract, and they were kind of getting tired, and it was leading to kind of burnout and those types of things. And so we kind of wanted to characterize, how people spent their time in respect to academic domains. So their clinical work, but also how much time they were spending with education, administration, and research. whether that was kind of aligned with what their personal preferences were and how that affected their job satisfaction. And we used a validated scale for job satisfaction in healthcare to assess that.
Yeah, I saw that the global was a job satisfaction scale. Is that what it's
Correct.
called? Yeah, that is really. I hadn't heard of that before, and I thought that was really, really a cool scale, especially because of the validation you mentioned, and then what it signified with the scores.
Right. Yeah, I think we were able to make some really interesting kind of associations.
Yeah, what'd you find in the study?
Yeah, so I'm gonna flip to my notes so I can make sure I can say all the things I meant to
No
say.
worries.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's totally fair.
so, we estimated kind of how much time people were spending on their clinical and non-clinical domains and kind of associated that with their job satisfaction. And so we found that certain elements of their work kind of linked up with decreasing their job satisfaction. So we found that for every 10% increase in clinical work over what their ideal situation was, their job satisfaction decreased by 3.5 points. And so just to give you a
Yeah.
reference, the GJS runs from negative 36 to 36, which is kind of a weird scale. But the average for emergency medicine physicians in our sample was 12. So for
Okay.
every 10% increase in clinical work, you had a decrease in job satisfaction by 3.5 points. And for every 10% increase in administrative work, you had a decrease in job satisfaction by 2.6 points. So it seems like those are kind of the things that are driving us to be unhappy in our work situation. But what was also
Yeah.
interesting was that for people who identified as core faculty for their residency program, that was associated in a +7 increase in their job satisfaction. And that in the institutions where they were required to log their non-clinical work hours, that was associated with an increase in job satisfaction by 3.7 points.
Yeah, I saw that. That is incredible. If that's not a way to recruit people to be core faculty, I don't know what
Yeah, there you
is.
go. Shout
Yeah,
out for Dr.
yeah,
Beatty.
absolutely, absolutely. And it was like in like you do both those things as a core faculty member, and they're independently associated with more with an increase in the
Right, right.
scale. Yeah, that's so cool. And then I have to point out the little kind of the surprise in the study about the
Oh, yeah.
5%. You got to mention that. That's so
Yeah,
funny to me.
so part of assessing kind of how good our estimations were for our contracted clinical hours in our survey was asking them if they really knew, if they were guessing, or if they had no idea. And like 5% of our sample had no idea how many clinical hours they were contracted to work, which was pretty alarming to us.
Yes. It's like that, just the completely like, I don't know, clueless or just oblivious part of our population that just like, oh, I don't know how many hours I'm clinically contracted to
Yeah,
work a
which is
month.
kind of funny because we toyed around with like naming the study is ignorance bliss. So,
Yes, there you go.
so yeah.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Meredith. That is so funny. This is a cool study. I mean, this was neat. And like you said, this is totally novel. Like no one seemed to have done anything like this before. And I think this is like opening the doors to just other avenues of exploration for wellness and job satisfaction and alignment with what you want to be
Yeah,
doing.
for sure. I think,
Yeah.
kind of zeroing in on some of the interesting findings of our study and kind of making some changes and studying that would be pretty interesting.
Definitely. So, wellness and this, I think this is also a great transition into like our department's upcoming kind of wellness initiatives. Do you want to talk some about that? And also, you have some history of being kind of a wellness advocate in the college. Do you feel free to tell everyone about what you've done in the past and then where we're going as a department for
Sure.
wellness?
So I was elected, I'm coming up on the end of my term actually. So plug if you're interested in joining the faculty council. So I was
Mm-hmm.
elected to the faculty council almost 3 years ago now. And through my involvement with the council, I was kind of summoned or elected or, nose goes, voluntold,
Voluntold.
nose goes, to be the wellness committee chair, which, I'm already interested in wellness. So it was a natural thing for me to be interested in. So I've been leading that group for about a year and a half now. And so a lot of our work thus far has been focusing on just doing things to let faculty know that they're appreciated. So one thing that kind of came out of our work group was the development of the clinical awards that were awarded last Friday. So shout out to Rohit Patel and Kendall Moore, who were our EM awardees.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So that's kind of part of what I've been doing in the wellness sphere. The other part, like faculty council related, is some things are going to be coming out about resources for faculty with disabilities and how to better access kind of FMLA and accommodations for when kind of life happens. So that's another thing we're working on. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And so kind of transitioning. So at the faculty council award ceremony, I was able to meet with Corey Feist, who is the chair of the board and co-founder of the Lorna Breen Foundation. Some of you may know that Lorna Breen was the emergency medicine physician who in New York City who took her life during COVID. And so kind of as a way to educate physicians and turn this into a positive, her family created this foundation. And so I was able to meet with Corey Feist, who surprisingly, we had UVA connections together because he used to be the CFO for the UVA physicians group. So that was fun, kind of talking about UVA and Charlottesville. So I made some contacts with him. So, and he had a lot of ideas to inform kind of where we want to go with our wellness initiatives. So, I think Rose announced that Chrissy Zaretsky, who's also been doing a ton in the wellness sphere, so we should have her on too. And then you yourself are going to be our departmental wellness champions. And so part of what we are working on right now to kind of kick things off, to kind of spearhead what wellness initiatives we're going to choose to pursue in our department, is we're working on a needs assessment. So it was really great to meet with him and get some kind of ideas to inform our survey. And so more to come on that.
This is only going to benefit us as faculty members and residents and staff. So I appreciate you coming on. Sometime in the future, we'll have to do a full profile of Dr. Meredith Thompson.
Okay. I did want to shout out to the faculty who are listening. If they have any ideas in the wellness sphere, to shoot us an email.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Meredith. Today, I am very honored to have Dr. Mary Patterson, the chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine, the Associate Dean and Lou Oberndorf Professor of Healthcare Technology, the Director of the Center for Experiential Learning and Simulation, and a full professor of pediatric emergency medicine on the podcast. And I could go on and on and on with an introduction, but that could take hours potentially, and we'll get to some of that when we talk. But Mary, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the ER Break Room.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you are the featured guest, and you've been on before, but not as the featured guest. But this is the time is fitting, I think, to really focus on you and your life.
Well, thank you. Hopefully, it'll be interesting to people. I hope.
No, I'm already fascinated. I will. I was able to track down your CV on the website, so I have a lot of insight and things to ask you about.
Okay.
And so let's just start with the beginning. Like, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Okay.
Do you have brothers and sisters, your family life from an early year?
Yeah, so I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, lived there until I went to college. I have two sisters and a brother. I'm the oldest. So I grew up loving the Steelers. The Steelers were... almost a religion. And we talk about the Steeler Nation. So I was fortunate to grow up with when the Steelers were really first making their name, won the 4 Super Bowls. And that was, yeah. And, a lot of pride in, the Franco Harris, Terry Bradshaw, the Steel
Wow.
Curtain, Joe Green, all those folks,
Legends.
Rocky
These are
Blyer.
legends.
My father actually went to high school with Dan Rooney, who the Rooney
Wow.
family, you probably know, owns the Steelers. And so I grew up in that time. So that shaped, I think, some of me.
Oh my gosh.
When we were growing up, I think there was a large service ethic in our family. So we started when I was probably in like 7th or 8th grade. We were volunteering for the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez, and
Whoa,
that
cool.
kind of stuff. So we did get to meet Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
Are you
Yeah.
serious? Wow.
And I think, it's kind of funny, but my sisters and I at one point went with the UFW farm worker organizers in Pittsburgh to Detroit for a weekend for an organizing. And we were in high school. I mean, we were pretty young.
Yeah.
And we were in a beat up car with the UFW organizers. We drove from Pittsburgh to Detroit. We stayed in a school gym. And I think about that now and I'm thinking, I don't know if I would have let my kids do that, go off with but we did. My parents let us go. So we grew up with that kind of ethic. I babysat and cleaned houses to make money, side money. And my sisters and brothers now, my brother is a teacher and a coach in Vermont. He lives in central Vermont. And he actually does work. You and I've talked about this. He does work on collecting with other teachers that are off in the summer. They're collecting an oral history of civil rights leaders, and they've been working on that for quite a number of years. Yeah, my once
did he go with you?
Sorry, he's actually younger than we are. He's about 6 years younger. So I think that my parents drew the line at sending him with myself and my sisters.
Right.
Let's see. And he was in the Peace Corps for a couple. No, it's okay. He was in the Peace Corps for a couple years. And our whole family did go. He was in Kenya, and we did go to visit him there for about 3 weeks. When he was in the Peace Corps.
Wow.
One of my sisters worked for the National Labor Relations Board for a while. Then got married, had kids. One of her children has special needs, but they also adopted another daughter. She's remained very politically active, as well as caring for my niece with special needs. And then my other sister, who lives in Oregon, is done a number of different things, but her degree was in business, and she's done some different things. But right now, the main thing she does is she actually got her general contractor's license, and she rehabs houses in Eugene, Oregon. But the interesting thing she does is she deliberately hires people in recovery, and gives them a chance to have meaningful work. And, that's a deliberate, something she does very deliberately. And she said, mostly it works and sometimes it doesn't. But she's been pretty successful at that. Yeah. So
you come from like your whole family's like activists. This is incredible. We could have a whole side conversation just about this stuff.
Yeah, my brother-in-law calls us progressive camp. He said when we get together, it's like progressive camp. So
camp. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah. So
wow. Okay. Wow. But this explains a lot. Okay. Wow. This is important. I'm glad we talked about this. This is good. So you get to the kind of the end of your at home, and you decide where you want to go to school for college. And how'd you make that decision, and where'd you go?
So honestly, it came down to, I knew I wanted to not live at home when I was in college. I wanted to move away, and I had was applying to colleges, and I had a full tuition scholarship to University of Pittsburgh or Penn State. Both gave me scholarships, and Penn State was 3 hours from home, so that's where I went. So it was really much less complicated than it is now.
Yes. Yeah. Right. You want that independence.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you were there, and what point did you decide you wanted to be go to medical school?
I
To be
was
a
pretty
doctor?
sure from the beginning that I wanted to go into
Mm-hmm.
medical school. It was really between medical
Mm-hmm.
school and veterinary school, honestly.
Oh wow.
But I ultimately, obviously decided on medicine and
Mm-hmm.
applied to medical schools and, got into a few, I guess two or three, I can't remember now, probably three, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
but I really liked Hershey at that time, Penn State Hershey was kind of
Okay.
literally in the middle of a cornfield. And I sort of liked the idea of being in a rural or semi-rural area. So
Yeah.
that's where I went.
Wow. Oh, that's neat. Okay. Uh, so then you do medical school, and of course everyone goes through the big decision of what they
Mm-hmm.
want to be. So how did you make that decision? Were you
Um,
always drawn to peds,
yeah,
or how'd that go?
I was actually always drawn to pediatrics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the kids were definitely more fun to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I liked the idea that there was so much potential, and that
Yeah.
we were, making a difference in terms of the future. So
Mm-hmm.
that was really important to me. And I will say I had really excellent pediatric role models. There were
I
a
see.
couple of
Yeah.
pediatric uh, professors that were just amazing role models, and
Mm-hmm.
that really made me want to go into pediatrics as well. So I think that's the same for a lot of people. Is that
Yeah.
the people who
Yeah.
are your role models, you want to emulate, and
Yeah.
so yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
That's good. Okay. So then you ended up in the
Yeah.
Midwest for
Yeah.
residency.
So my husband and I were in the very first couples match. And I will say
Mm-hmm.
that was a really interesting experience because nobody
Wow.
knew what to do with us. And sometimes they would interview
Yeah.
us together, like we
Uh-huh.
were like a single entity. And that was strange. And
Uh-huh. I can't
yeah,
imagine.
it was really interesting. And we were a little anxious because we weren't really sure how this was all going to work out. There was one
Yeah.
time where particularly a large freestanding children's hospital said, so, the chair offered us that he would take us right now. And we just had to agree that, and we'd already signed the match agreement, of course. And we said, well,
Mm-hmm.
we've already signed the match agreement. And he said, but who knows,
Right.
who's going to know what we agreed to right here? And, my
Oh,
yeah so
jeez.
my husband and I both kind of said, well, if he's willing to make that kind of a compromise, what other kinds of
Yeah.
compromises is he willing?
Right.
So
Right.
we did end up at
Right. Yeah.
in Columbus, Ohio. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
there were some people who graduated from our medical school that were there already, and
Mm. Okay.
so they were, really instrumental, I think, in convincing us that was the right place. And it was a big enough residency that
Nice.
we weren't going to be tripping over, we didn't want to be tripping over each other as both as pediatric residents. So yeah.
I
Yeah.
see. I see. Yeah, I was going to ask you at some point, like when you met your husband. So it sounds like a medical
Yeah,
school or
medical
undergrad,
school.
or
So
yeah,
we were
medical
in the
school. Medical
same.
school.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if people
Yeah.
still do this or not. We had a dinner group, and the idea was that everybody took turns cooking one weekday night a week for
Mm-hmm.
5 people, 6 people, and that way the other folks
Yeah.
could study later, and we each took turns, and it was a little bit. It was obviously social as well, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
ended up being with. My husband was one of the people who was friends with the guy who organized it. So that's
Uh-huh.
how it ended
Uh-huh.
up happening.
Oh, so he wasn't even in the group, but he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
friends with the
yeah.
guy in
And
the
then he
group. I
became
see.
part of the group.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
That's neat. That's a
yeah,
neat story. I like
yeah. So
that.
that's how we
Yeah.
met.
So that's how you met, and then you go together to Columbus, and you do pediatric
Uh-huh.
residency, and you didn't do emergency medicine right after,
No,
correct?
I was in the Air
Yeah.
Force. So I'd had a health professions scholarship. So I was in
Yeah.
the Air Force, and that was really interesting because at that time in the military, I was straight out of residency and plopped kind of in all of a sudden with a lot of responsibility without necessarily having much training in those areas. So, wasn't, running the NICU, which was a level 2 NICU. And again, I had a lot of neonatology experience as a resident, but still, right.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And now I was making decisions about when to transfer patients. And fortunately, we'd done a lot of, critical transports as residents, but, I was, transferring patients. I was sent to the Azores for temporary duty, and I was the only pediatrician on the island, and also doing MAOD. So that's really interesting, because you have to make decisions about, this kid's got bronchiolitis, and do I, because getting a plane and getting the patient transported was quite the process. And you had to kind of make a decision around how, do I think this patient's going to get worse, get better? Same with newborns. Right. And so it was a really interesting experience. I also made house calls there on the weekends if I wanted to see how a patient was doing, and the clinic wasn't open, but and again, this was, sort of towards the tail end of H flu. So when a kid had a fever, we were, we wanted to know if they were doing okay. And, so I would actually make house calls then. Yeah. So I went to Panama right after the invasion. That was interesting. Wow. Because there were, hospitals, with Red Crosses on them that were bombed. So it was really an interesting experience.
Oh my gosh. I'm just chuckling because I just looking at you and knowing you, I would never think you were in the armed forces. Just, it seems so, different compared to what you do now and stuff. But wow, that's really neat. Yeah. And wow, you must've learned so much and grew so much during that time.
I would say, there are lots of, I obviously wasn't fighting anybody and never carried a gun or anything like that. Right. But I did learn a lot, matured a lot. So, I would say that depending on how it's structured, it can be a really good experience in terms of the learning and maturity, right out of training. It was,
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so then you did that for a few years, and then you ended up, how did you choose, or why did you choose to go into do a pediatric emergency medicine fellowship?
I wanted, from the time I was a resident, I knew I wanted to do pediatric emergency medicine. My husband actually said, you're happiest when you're in the emergency department. And he was,
Oh, cool. That's neat.
It was really interesting. I really did not like rounding. Rounding was painful. I did not like rounding. Yes. Some rounding worse than others. We had one guy who rounded on Hemong, for hours and hours and hours. And remember, this is before there were work hour restrictions. So, so it could just go on interminably. I did not like rounding, and I really liked acute care, stabilization, getting to make a diagnosis, all those sorts of, things that we like, the acuity, the procedures. So I knew from the time I was a resident, I wanted to do pediatric emergency medicine. There wasn't a way to do that in the military. So I did my time in the military, which I think actually made me better prepared and helped me be more appreciative of moving back into an academic institution to do my fellowship. So I think it was maybe if I'd had my, absolute perfect solution, I might not have done it in that order, but it actually, I think, worked out well. Yeah.
That's great. So you do you get your fellowship in peds, and then what was next? And that was where?
We were in Washington, D.C. at Children's National.
D.C. Okay, so you're moving around a lot. I noticed that throughout you have moved around a lot in your career,
and
right?
And I think part of that is just two career family. I think two physician because I purposely did my fellowship in DC because my husband we were both in DC. I was in the military. That was my home base, although I was deployed in other places, and he was doing his nephrology fellowship, pediatric nephrology, and then he stayed on to do to work at NIH to do a second fellowship in research. And so it made sense for me to do my EM fellowship, my PEM fellowship in DC as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. How do you two, through, you both have very successful and interesting careers, and how do you two navigate that with, I mean, would sometimes you prioritize one person's opportunity and go along, or has it gone both ways?
I think, so I think that there are always compromises, right? I think with any marriage, there are compromises. With us, it was also about the professional opportunities. And sometimes it's what does the job market allow, right? When my husband finished training at NIH, there really weren't a lot of pediatric nephrology jobs, and we ended up in North Carolina at Wake Forest, and for us, that was a compromise because I was the first PEM doctor there, and it's never good to be the first and be the only one. That's a bit challenging.
Oh, wow.
And my husband did have another nephrology partner there, but it was tough because it was every other weekend for him. And I was trying to build a PEM peds department, and I was the only one, and that's really hard.
Wow.
So, and then the other challenge was the culture then at that time was not very welcoming to, it was still not very welcoming to women. And I can remember my husband one time asking, I said, I don't understand why it's so hard here for me. And he said, you're a woman, you speak your mind, and you don't have an accent. Or actually, he said you do have an accent, because I didn't have a Southern accent.
It wasn't a Southern accent, right?
So, yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So we did then, but we got the jobs in Cincinnati, which was a really good place for us. And that's where we raised our kids.
Oh, yeah. Incredible. Oh, that's great. So that's when you go to Cincinnati, and how did you find out? I mean, how did that job come about?
And I don't, this is the kind of thing that I don't know if it still happens anymore. One of my attendings, one of my faculty from when I was a fellowship, I was at a meeting, and we were talking, and I was sort of sharing what challenges there were and in my current position, and one of his good friends was the division director in Cincinnati. And he introduced me, and he said to Rich Ruddy, he said, do you need another PEM doc? Because, Mary's a really good PEM doc. We trained her. And then, and he's like, sure. And then he talked to the, department chair and nephrology, and they said, sure, they could use another pediatric nephrologist. And, I have no idea, now knowing what I know, like, how did they have lines? How did they, finance this, all that sort of thing. And again, it was a different time in healthcare, but it was just like, it was almost, we went and interviewed and everything, but it was almost like done on a handshake. Like, we can make this happen.
Wow.
And that actually,
almost like a simpler time.
It ended up being really fortunate for both of us, because, my husband was working in a lab part-time, doing developmental biology with a PhD that he really respected. He respected the division director for nephrology. I think working for Rich Ruddy was one of the best things that ever happened to me. He was really interested in faculty development. He's the person that supported me getting into simulation and medical education. So I feel like that was sort of this, and it was at a time when Cincinnati was really working on quality and safety. And so there was an area for us and opportunities within that domain. So I feel like I was really, really fortunate to have somebody who was interested in faculty development, in having each individual reach their maximum potential. And it was also like an amazing time to be at that particular healthcare organization, because there was such a drive for improvement and such a drive to be the best. So it was really cool, exciting time to be working there.
Yeah, it sounds like, wow. So it sounds like you're this amazing
Yeah. Yeah.
mentor and leader that supports you and supports all the faculty. And then, and you did like, wow, I was going to ask about that. So you got, so you got
Yeah.
your master's
Yeah.
in education
Yeah.
while you're there, correct? And then also I was wondering about your kind of your origin
Oh,
story with
yeah.
simulation. And then also, when you
Yeah.
get into resilience, human
A
factors, is
lot
that
of
all
it.
there too?
So simulation
Yeah.
was really just sort of getting started in pediatrics at that time. And I was interested in resuscitation. That's what a lot of my scholarly work had been in. And that was my fellow's project, was on a high dose epinephrine multi-center study. And I was coming to realize that, we weren't going to fix this with medication. And what we really needed to work on was the teams and how teams work together. And so I was involved in teaching that just as a Penn faculty member. And Tom Lemaster, who's now is our operations director for the simulation center here, that's where Tom and I first connected. And he was running the education and training for the ED, originally just the emergency department. And they went to Rich Ruddy with this proposal to buy this $100,000, actually more than $100,000 pediatric simulator. That was a big ask. This was about 2003, 4. And Rich went along with it, and he asked me if I'd be the medical director. And that's really what started it. And that's where Tom and I first connected. And we bought the first pediatric human patient simulator, was at Cincinnati Children's. Rich believed in it. And then it's moved, not only just the emergency department, but across the entire healthcare organization. But it started in the emergency department there because Rich believed in it. And then I because we were doing, educational scholarly work, I decided to get my master's in education, which I always say I got at 3 a.m. because we had 2 young kids. We were both working full time. And so I did the work on all that was always, after the kids went to bed or after I got back from a shift or something like that. So, it was,
gosh.
I'm glad I did it. But it was tough at the time, but in the end it was a good, I'm glad I did it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Crazy. And then you had your kids when you got to
they were
Cincinnati
actually
as well,
born in DC before we left DC. And, but we're only in North Carolina for a couple of years. So they were, I think 3 or 4 when we moved to Cincinnati, and really that's where we stayed until they graduated from high school. So that's where they grew up. That's what they know. So that,
Yeah. Oh, tell the story about you finding out the gender or whatever, or how you guys went about that. Or not finding, I should say not. That's
so,
that was a funny story.
Yeah, when we had our first ultrasound, I guess we already knew we might not have been the first one. It was after the first one, but we knew we were having twins, and they asked us if we wanted to know the gender, and we wanted to be surprised. And they said, well, don't look now. And my husband, because he's a nephrologist, knows ultrasounds. And he said, well, there's at least one boy because they're telling us not to look. And if there's nothing there, there's nothing to see, so he figured there's at least one boy. And so there were 2 boys. So very different personalities from the moment they were born. But fraternal. One actually looks like my husband, and one looks like my side of the family. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, nice. That's great. Nice. That's great. That's cool. I like that story. That's nice. And then what about human factors engineering?
The way that started is that when I was starting to apply for federal funding and for educational work, and in healthcare and safety work, HRQ, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, is the agency that really one works through. I was talking. They actually had some specific safety and one RFP that involved simulation. And when I was talking to the science officers there, the project officers, they said, well, you're junior, you really need to get somebody on board who's more senior. And they offered up some names, but one of the names that was offered up was Bob Weir's. And I knew of Bob Weir's work and I'd read his work. Again, remember, this is sort of before there are as many you're not calling people on cell phones and things like that. An email was still relatively new. So I sent an email to Bob Weir's and arranged a time to talk to him. He was actually on sabbatical in England when I reached out to him and said, you don't know me. I've read your work. I'm working on this work in safety and simulation, and would you be willing to work with me on it? And he said, well, I'm coming back from England in, 3 months or whatever. And sure. And I'd be glad to work with you on it. And I've learned subsequently, it's actually interesting. So Bob passed away in 2017. He had such an influence on people in the human factors, safety, all these areas, resilience engineering and safety too. And I'm actually organizing the Resilience Engineering Conference is going to be in St. Augustine in May. I'm organizing a tribute to honor Bob. And I've reached out to people I know that he influenced, that he mentored. And what's just really fascinating is all the stories about how generous he was with his time. And I thought how incredible it was that he was willing to, I didn't have any reputation. He didn't know me from Adam, and he still reached, he still was willing to help me, had a tremendous, so to your point, introduced me to human factors, and introduced me to resilience engineering safety too, introduced me to a lot of people that I remain in contact with today and that I consider colleagues. But he did that. I cannot even tell you the number of people he did that for. So just an incredibly generous person with his time, with his knowledge, and really creating these networks of people that know each other and have common interests and now collaborate with one another. So that's how I became interested in and started to learn about, human factors, team performance, systems, resilience engineering, safety too. But really, Bob introduced me to all of it. Yeah.
Incredible. What it sounds like an amazing, incredible individual, and what a great tribute you're doing for him and to honor him. And it seems like Rose had a similar story of just kind of reaching out, and he just, she was shocked too. It seemed like she also was very surprised that he just, went out and just took her under.
So
and
that's actually exactly right. Bob mentored Rose. And actually she had moved to Jacksonville to work with Bob in the safety domain. And unfortunately, Bob passed away very close to that. And that's honestly how we were able to get Rose over here, is because she didn't have mentors or connections there. So we were able to bring her over here. So that was, I'm not happy about the way or the reason it happened, but it did allow us to bring Rose here. But but that's absolutely true. Bob had, there are, again, I'm collecting these stories that I've asked people who knew Bob to share about his influence and what he did for them, and how they learned from him. And the stories are just amazing. Just amazing.
That's great. Yeah. Is Bob part of what?
No, actually not. Bob and I never actually worked in the same institution. I didn't come here till after he'd passed away. But the way I ended up here was Mike Good, who was the dean in 2016, 17. He was dean for, I think, about 5-7 years in the 2010s up until 2018, I guess. So Mike Good, who was an anesthesiologist, is an anesthesiologist, and then also had been involved in developing the human patient simulator here, was interested with Lou Obendorf, who is the founder of the company that made the human patient simulator. We're interested in developing a more robust simulation program here, because although it had been developed here, there really wasn't any sort of ongoing simulation work in sort of a large scale way. And so he reached out to me, or the recruitment committee did, I guess. And I met up with him at one of the simulation meetings. It was in Orlando. And so we talked there, and I was then invited to come give, I think, grand rounds here in emergency medicine, and then interviewed, and my husband interviewed, and here we are. Yeah. But it was, but the simulation, I mean, it was a great opportunity I like building things. And so it was a great opportunity to build another simulation program. And I was able to, Tom Lemaster, who'd been at Cincinnati Children's, had moved to St. Jude's. And, but when I called him and asked him if he thought he had it in him to build one more, and he said, "I'm excited to get the band back together." And so that was actually very cool to get him to come here as well. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Nice. All right. So tell me, your boys. You have your sons. How did you balance raising your boys and with work? And then also,
so
what are they up to?
I will just say it's hard, right? I mean, I think it's a challenge, and I think I am, and we were at the time really, really fortunate that it's not entirely equal. It there are times when one parent does more and one parent is overwhelmed with something else, and then it flips, right? So there has to be some flexibility and adaptability. And it means that I was a mother who bought cupcakes, didn't make cupcakes, or whatever. Or my husband bought them. So I think there's that sort of, there has to be that sort of flexibility, and it also means that, you do things like, and I'm a firm believer, people always say, well, if I get somebody in to clean the house, they're not going to clean the house like I would. And that's true. And you can't do everything. So you have to make some compromises. So you get somebody in to clean, you get maybe somebody to do yard work, if that's part of it. It's not that the kids don't have chores, but it's just, it's crazy. I mean, and I think it's potentially harder now. Our kids played sports and they had activities that we had to manage, the cars and all, who picks up and who does what. And I'm working days, but, or I'm working nights and I can do this part, but not that part. And we were just really, really fortunate, I think, that we had a lot of understanding. And I think the good news about that was that our kids saw us as partners, and they didn't view one of us as, this is the person that cooks or this is the person that washes the clothes. We both did whatever needed to be done when we had an ability. And I think they grew up, they didn't see it as one person or the other person's work. So I'm really grateful that I think my husband and I have supported one another. And I actually did ask our kids once, after they were through college, I asked them, because they went to aftercare, right? So after school, they went to aftercare. And I said, did you mind that? And this was after they were through college. And they said, no, we didn't mind aftercare. We had friends there. We got our homework done. We played. They said, the only thing we minded is when you were late when it snowed. Well, I have to know, in Cincinnati does not do well with snow. Cincinnati is right on the border of where there's typically a snow ice transition. So people are not really good at driving in snow. And when it did snow, we jokingly called it the White Death. And And it was one of those things where traffic just became incredibly snarled with any little bit of snow. So everybody was late when it snowed. It might have been 2 or 3 times a year. It wasn't very much, but they said no. And yeah. And then the other thing they did say is, because we didn't let them play video games growing up. And, they said to us, and this is after college, so don't expect this from a teenager. They said, we really appreciate that you tried to give us experiences rather than things. And I thought that was really, wow. That was very, affirming for my husband and me to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's great advice too for maybe, younger parents or future parents. So, wow. That's great.
So,
nice. And what are they up to?
Nathan, so they both they're twins, and they both, went to different colleges, but both majored in chemistry. Nathan majored in chemistry and classics, so go figure there. But Nathan is working in business. Wow. He's actually working for a startup in New York City. They do AI on distribution logistics to minimize fuel use, maximize efficiency, improve their environmental impact. And he's currently trying to decide. He has a number of MBA acceptances, and he's trying to decide whether to take time off from a startup that he really likes working for, and get his MBA or not. So we'll see what happens there. And then John, also a chemistry major and very smart as well. The college he went to required they spend a lot of time in the lab, and so when he graduated, he was just tired of being in the lab. So he actually did a couple things. He worked as a chemist for a chocolatier, a small chocolate company, for I guess that was a little less than a year. So he did a lot standardizing their processes with, melting points and cooling and all this sort of thing. But then he went and was a ski instructor for a couple of years. So he was a ski instructor in Telluride. And then he decided that, he'd done that. And he ended up getting his PhD in climate science, specifically in glaciology. And he's now a postdoc. And he, for fun, he backcountry skis. He does avalanche classes. He also climbs. So he does lots of things that make, as an emergency medicine physician, make me a little anxious. Or a lot anxious, but yeah, that's what he does. Right.
Yeah, that's wow.
Well,
so this
actually,
is where your love of skiing comes from.
We started taking them
associated
skiing
with your boys
when they were pretty young. So I will tell you that when my husband and I first started, I hesitate to say dating because I'm not sure you really date in medical school. You're too busy, but we first started doing things together. He took me skiing at a little ski hill outside of Harrisburg called Round Top. And it's like typical Eastern skiing, right? It's icy, short runs, all the stuff. And the first time he took me, I was wearing jeans and I ate a ski pole and broke 2 teeth. So it was not, I had never skied before. So it was not really an auspicious beginning. And he also, so realized that if he couldn't teach me, right, that's like trying to teach your spouse to drive or whatever. So having clothes that were, waterproof and having somebody teach me made a big difference. And then we started taking our kids skiing, and they got into it. So I think I would say I'm an okay skier. My kids are amazing. And John in particular is,
I bet
really he does things that, he does these couloirs and things that I look at and go just like, so.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Terrifying stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. He does.
But I'm sure he loves it though.
So.
Yeah.
So
and then when did you get
Larry's
into birding?
Family really, they always were into birding. His mother in particular, albeit they didn't go out hunting birds. They lived on an area that had a lot of woods, and so they could see birds around. But they didn't go out walking looking for birds. But especially as the kids got older and we had a little bit more time, we started to go off and do a weekend birding somewhere, or we got better binoculars and started paying more attention. And especially, after the kids left home, we started doing it more deliberately. And then as well, during COVID, of course, I think a lot of people became much more interested. And I will say there's some great places. I mean, Florida has interesting bird life anyhow. And we're on the flyway, on one of the migratory flyways. Yeah. And if you go over like to St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge over on the Panhandle, there's just amazing bird life there, especially in the wintertime when the migratory birds are here. So there's a lot to see. It's a great place. Or if you go over to Merritt Island, there's an endangered bird called the Florida scrub jay that actually you can see quite often over there. So yeah, there's a lot. And then when you go other places, it's always fun to look for what kind of birds. And we've got some really good people. I mean, Taylor and Giuliano and Henry. Henry still sends me photos from Ohio, actually. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so there's a group of people who are really, really talented. And of course, Giuliano and Henry and Taylor are like amazing photographers for birds.
Oh my gosh. Yes. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So that's a good plug for anyone else in our department that's interested in birding. They can just hit up one of these individuals and do some birding. I've been lucky to go with Taylor several times in the Audubon Society at the Sweetwater. Yeah. So it's really fun. Really enjoy it.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead. I was gonna say, so to wrap up here, a couple of questions. I want to know, since you've had you've had an incredible career and still in the midst of it, any advice for younger, earlier doctors in their career?
I would say, because people always worry about like their passion and finding their passion. And so a couple things. One is, I don't think I found my passion till I was in my 40s, my professional passion. And that's okay. I think, you're always encouraged to focus. And I think you have to find what it is you really want to focus on. You have to find what gives you joy, what excites you. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, we talk a lot about promotion, and I think that it's important to remember that the promotion, the typical timelines that we're used to talking about, where you promote in 7 years or whatever. Those were established when there was largely, one parent working, one parent doing full-time childcare or whatever. And, there was not the same sort of, expectation of sharing, responsibility. And, everybody says that your kids are only young once, and you don't have that much time. So I would say that, don't, and like I said, I'm maybe not a great example because I did my master's at 3 a.m, but, I would say it's good for your kids to see that you can be productive and have a role, that is meaningful and that you're passionate about. And you still want your kids to know they're the most important thing, in the world. So I think that the 7 years might be a little bit artificial, and we should, and we're not an up and out institution. So up or out, I guess it is. So I think, understanding, that you don't have to be, all in on the academics. And I think the other piece to recognize is here, you don't have to be first or last author for it to count. So I think the idea of that Rose is working on with having writing groups and everybody gets credit, I think that's brilliant. And something, we should be embracing, because that works for promotion. And also per some of the conversations you and I have had, we also have to get the college and the university to look more broadly at what is scholarly. And so that's the other piece of it. I think, and other people have said this, find your passion, the timeline is artificial. All of us are, not everybody, but our working lifespan is probably longer than it was, 40 years ago. And I think that it's okay. And in fact, maybe healthier to spend time, focus on your family and your kids. Yeah, we all have to work, and it's okay if the scholarly work comes a little bit later, in my mind. I mean, it's hard to go, if you haven't done any, it's hard to plunge in. But if you've been doing a little bit all along, then you can become, very productive once you have the bandwidth to do it, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
I personally.
And the other thing I would say is pay anybody, pay for the things that aren't meaningful to you. Yeah. So housework, I hate, pay for it. Bought bakery cookies are okay if you don't have time or inclination to bake. Those, that's okay.
Right.
It's not less than to have somebody else, and it might be a slightly different standard, and that's okay. If the bathroom and the kitchen are getting cleaned, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, your time is worth more. Yes. And then finally, as chair of UF, Department of Emergency Medicine,
it's the people. And I know that sounds really cliche, but we have really, really great people here. And I've talked to other colleagues in other emergency departments, and I think that it's a special group of people who go into emergency medicine anyhow, especially now, and who stay in emergency medicine because, clearly we have lots of challenges in the system, in healthcare organizations, and that's nationally. And we have really, really great people. I get letters from patients all the time. And they're about how a particular individual was kind and caring and made the right diagnosis and saved them, and like literally saved their life. And, that's pretty amazing. Like, I don't know how often that happens in other specialties, where we have this opportunity to really make this profound difference, and doing it with compassion and empathy. Right. So so we have really, really special people. And I mean, you've learned how really interesting our people are, as well as being great clinicians and great teachers. We have really interesting people as well.
Mary, thank you for coming.
I enjoyed it.
And being
Thanks
our
for having me
this month. That's all for this episode. Special thanks to our chair, Dr. Mary Patterson, for supporting this podcast, and to Dr. Giuliano DePortu for composing our theme music. I'm Michael Petrauskas. Be well.